And I think Jeanette will be joining us shortly if she's not already on. Maybe we could take a roll call on board members at least. JP, are you off mute?
Are you off mute?
Okay, Bruce, now I'm off mute.
Now you're off mute. Hi, JP.
Good morning.
I'll let you kind of take over, but I wonder if we shouldn't just kind of take attendance for board members. Everyone else, I think I've got you on the webinar, so we have a list there. If you had other folks sitting with you, maybe you could unmute your line and let us know. But go ahead, JP.
Sounds good. Paula, do you want to do a roll call of the board members? And then after that, anyone who's not on the webinar would like to chime in and let us know that you're on the phone, that would be great.
This is Jeanette, and I am on.
Doug?
I'm here.
Jeanette?
I'm here.
Pat?
Here.
Sheila?
*2.
And then Bob is excused and Ingrid is excused.
Okay.
So just Sheila.
Sheila's here.
Okay.
Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. Is there any public comment on items that are not on today's agenda from anyone on the phone? Hearing none, I'll move on to the minutes from last month. Board members, have you had a chance to look at last month's minutes?
I have, and this is Doug. Just to point out that I was actually present at the meeting, only on the webinar.
Oh, yeah, we'll make that change.
Would somebody like to make a motion to approve?
I would move adoption of the minutes with the change that Doug just mentioned about his name.
And I will second it.
Thank you. Is there any comments or questions about the minutes? If not, Paula, would you do a roll call vote, please?
Doug?
Yes.
Jeanette?
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
Sheila?
Yes.
JP?
Yes.
5-0.
Okay. Minutes have passed for the January board meeting. And moving on to the next item on the agenda, which I had in front of me for a minute ago, but now it's gone.
Hold on, just do this.
There we go. It's back. Wind and hail minimum deductible policy change.
Good morning, everyone. This is Vicki. So in your board packet, I have an agenda item. In October 2012, we changed the hazard insurance requirements from a flat $1,000 to $1,000, the greater of $1,000 or 1%. With wind and hail storms in primarily eastern Montana over the last couple of years, we've heard from lenders, borrowers, as well as insurance companies that it's harder and harder to meet the deductible requirements that we currently have set. We did some research calling insurance companies, and we found that it is possible for borrowers to get insurance that meets our requirements. A lot of insurance companies are moving away from any kind of a flat deductible. They are moving more towards a percent, and 1% is doable, but it gets harder to find. And some insurance companies have moved to a minimum wind and hail of $1,500, just because they're trying to recoup some of their losses that they've incurred over the last couple of years. In doing research for this, I also pulled neighboring states, and Wyoming and South Dakota, they have requirements that are the same as ours. Wyoming did say that they are in the process of revisiting them because they're hearing the same things we are, as far as they're getting harder to meet. North Dakota, they have a $1,500 or 1% on general insurance. Their regular hazard insurance and their wind and hail deductibles are set at $2,500 or 1%. And in Idaho, it's the lesser of $2,500 or 2%. What staff requests today is that the board change our policy to having hazard insurance deductible requirements set at $1,500 or 1%. The average purchase price of our loans over the past 2 years has been approximately $148,000, so the majority of a good portion of our borrowers already meet this qualification if they go with the 1% allowable deductible. So I request that we change ours to the $1,500, and that's for all perils, regular hazard insurance as well as wind and hail.
Vicki, this is Doug. So is that 1%, 1,000, like 1,500 or 1%, whichever's greater or whichever's least, or what?
It is the greater of.
Okay.
So if they have a $180,000 mortgage, it would be $1,800 deductible.
Thank you. I'd make a motion that we accept the proposal as presented.
This is Jeanette. I would second the motion.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Is there any comments or questions from board members?
This is Pat. I think we should make it clear, as Doug questioned, that it's the greater of 1,500 or 1%.
Okay, any other comments? Is there any public comment on the proposed change in insurance?
I would accept that change to the motion that Pat proposed.
As would I.
Okay. Any last comments before Paula does a roll call vote? Hearing none. Paula, could you do a vote for us?
Yes.
Jeanette,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Sheila,
Yes.
JP,
Yes.
5-0. Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Do you have anything else?
Nope, that's it for me today.
Great. Moving on to the multifamily program.
So Mary is going to do most of the talking here, but I just kind of wanted to introduce the issue and kind of how this process is going to work. I'm in the process of turning the presentation over to Greg Gould. Greg, are you? There you are. So this is the spot on the agenda where basically Mary's going to walk through the qualified allocation plan with the proposed changes that staff is proposing. We had a real good meeting down in Bozeman the end of January with a lot of interested parties and developers. We had great conversation about our allocation plan and kind of some of the things that might work moving forward. Of course, I think we included some of those changes in this draft plan, but not all of them. I think some of them kind of need to be thought about and worked on a little bit more. But kind of just to let you guys know how this process will work, today we'll walk through and kind of answer questions and explain the changes that at least staff is proposing. Board members will have a chance to ask questions and even make changes to this draft plan. But after that, what we plan on doing is releasing it for public comment. So it will be out for a month or so for public comment. We will actually have a hearing. And Mary, remind me, do we have the day?
We do. I want to say it's the...
Yeah, we'll get the exact day posted so you all know when that is, and we'll send out emails telling you when that will be. It'll be, I believe it's next week is when we're doing it. We will then bring the plan back to the board at the March meeting. We are in Butte this year, or in March. We will bring all of the comments, written or verbal, back to the board at that point in time. And then the board will consider all those comments and all that input and make any final changes to the plan that you guys want to make. So there's plenty of chances to public comment, as is today, because at any public meeting there's a chance to comment. But I guess we'd kind of encourage folks to comment during the period, and then we can kind of run it through the normal process, but just to let folks know they do have an opportunity today also. So, JP, do you have any other questions?
Nope, I think you covered it just fine.
Oh, it's the 17th.
The public hearing.
Public hearing is the 17th, and it'll be by webinar also, I believe.
Yep.
As well as here in the office. So.
It'll be in the afternoon because that admin plan one is in the morning on that same day.
Okay, so it'll be in the afternoon. So Greg, you are driving the allocation plan on the webinar. JP, can you see the webinar fine?
Yes, I can.
Okay. And I'm going to let Mary kind of, one of the things I don't know if you're able to or where you're located, what you might want to do is at the cover of the allocation plan was a list of the significant changes. You know, you may want to print that off and follow along there. Otherwise, just follow along on the webinar and we'll kind of walk you through it.
And I'm just going to kind of go through that list of changes. The first thing is that there are several red line changes in the QAP that are not highlighted and are not listed because they're clarifications.
Excuse me, Pat.
Yes?
I was wondering if maybe it wouldn't work better if we had a motion on the floor to adopt the QAP as amended by the staff, and then if we make changes as we go through, it can be amendments to that motion, and then we can vote on the motion at the end of the discussion.
Okay.
That's fine, Pat.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
For that
Sure,
purpose,
that's
I would,
a good idea.
and for
No,
that purpose,
this is Sheila. So, Pat, I understand where you're going with that, but what I see is a series of amendments. Wouldn't it be better just to kind of get there in consensus and then make the motion so we don't have to go through the formal amendment process for every single change that we want to make to the amended QAP?
well, I suppose that would work too. We don't have a formal record of adopting the motions, but okay.
Really, Chairman's call.
Thank you, Ben.
I think one of those that's kind of hard to do on the phone. So I actually think it might be, even though it's a little bit more cumbersome, just so that we have a full record, that we should probably do the initial motion and then amendments to that as it changes throughout the call. Unless I'll defer to Greg if he feels otherwise.
No, I agree. That's a good approach.
And for that purpose, I would move that the the QAP with the suggested amendments by staff be approved.
Pat, approve for release for comment.
Be approved for release for comment, yes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
And then I guess Paula, can you do a roll call vote for us, please?
Oh, excuse me. We don't have the vote to approve until after we've had the discussion and made any amendments to the motion.
Yes, sorry. I'm stepping ahead of myself there. Thanks, Pat.
It's the Monday after the Super Bowl, as Penny said, so
Right.
we all need to help each other along here. Okay. So, as I said before, there's several red line changes that are going to show up in here. I think they're kind of purple at this point on this, but on what you're seeing on the webinar. Those are clarifications and aren't listed as a change. The ones that are highlighted and or listed on this list of changes are the more substantial changes. They're beyond clarification. The next thing is that we have had several exhibits throughout the QAP. We're now pulling those out of the QAP, and all the forms will be addressed as the name of the form in the QAP, and there will be, all those forms will be available on the website. And so, the first highlighted change there is actually just the website. The other language I believe was there, or it's just clarification. Isn't that correct, Greg?
This language that's highlighted in yellow is, I believe that is new language indicating that the forms will all be on the website. And there's more language in the QAP and other places that further discuss moving the forms to the website.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so then we go to page 3. Definitions. We have added a definition of common space there. Common space means any space in the building on the project property that is not in the units. For example, hallways, stairways, community rooms, laundry rooms, garages, carports. Common area is eligible to be paid for with housing credits. And that one did not get highlighted. Sorry about that. Oh, yes, you caught that for me, didn't you, Paula? Thank you. Because we're working in the Word document now. Okay, so then we go to, still on page 3, cost per square foot. We have changed total project costs to only hard costs. And hard costs are further defined later. Cost per unit is the same. We have changed to hard costs instead of total project costs.
So, Mary, this is Sheila, and tell me if I'm not doing this right in terms of the flow. I'd like to hear more about the rationale between changing from total project to hard costs. Should I wait till later, or should I ask that question now?
Oh, good question now.
You're fine. So total project costs include some things that, that include soft costs, which we are limiting otherwise to 30% of in the soft to hard ratio, or 35% of small projects. The other thing that has been that is in the total project costs that can do the numbers a lot is that land costs were added in there, and so somebody who is paying high costs gets kind of penalized in that area, where somebody who was getting donated land, or there was no cost or minimal cost, their hard costs could have been a fair amount higher in these calculations.
Well, I understand that piece, but it seems to me like that's not a problem. I guess my biggest concern is I see that there's, if you take out and just use hard costs, it's not a fair representation of real costs. So I as a board member, I might want to have a project that had donated land because it brought down the overall cost.
But and that is true. It would bring down the overall cost, and we could maybe put out a figure out there so you guys know what that figure is if you're interested in that. But the cost per square foot is a just something we're using at this point in part of the information. The cost per unit is actually capped at a certain amount, so they can't go over that certain amount. And so that in using that capped amount, it kind of levels the playing field between somebody who is paying really high costs and somebody who has donated land.
I think another part of the discussion that we heard was when we hear, you know, folks kind of talk in the public about, you know, what is it costing to build these projects. This might be, I mean, a little bit more in line with what folks are talking about. But Sheila, to address your issue, I mean, maybe what we could do is actually, you know, give you guys both of them. You could have both to compare.
I think that would be a good compromise. The other concern I have, and this is really related to the hard costs definition, was that a building would be included. So if it's a preservation project, that's going to increase the cost.
Correct.
That's going to increase the card cost, but land doesn't. So it just seemed to me like it really opened things up for.
But even on an acquisition rehab, the land cost on those would be backed out. Yes, you would include the building because that's part of the hard cost. But so, Greg, maybe what we could do is cost per square foot means hard costs and total project costs. Just a thought, if you guys want to make that change.
I would just definitely like to see it. Yeah.
So Sheila, do you want to add just the land back in there or everything? Because when we're talking about total project costs, we're talking about all the every cost that comes in on that application for that project,
including reserves.
I would like to see total development cost. Yes.
Okay. So we could leave that one in there for.
Are you saying? Okay, I'm sorry. Sheila, are you saying you want to see a cost per square foot and a cost per unit calculated both with only hard costs on the one hand and then also with total project cost?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Would you like to propose that as an amendment?
No, I want Pat to do it. Just kidding. Just kidding. Yes, I would propose that as an amendment to the original motion.
This is Pat. I'm wondering if we need that or if that's just information that would be, if we need to change the QAP to include that, or if that's just information that would be provided to the board.
Well, this calculation actually comes to play further down also, mainly in the area where we say, because we're in what we're proposing right now is changing the per unit cost maximum based on total project cost at $230. Our proposal was to change that to per unit cost based on hard costs and putting that down at $175,000 per unit versus the $230.
And I recognize that. I just, what I heard Sheila say is she'd like to see the total project cost per square foot when she's making a decision. I don't think
we give you all kinds of information that's not listed out in the QAP.
Right, so we could still do that. Part of our discussion here, though, with this definition needs to be, what do you want to do with that maximum per unit cost also? I mean, Pat?
Yeah, and I think that's what he's saying.
I'm comfortable with that, but I agree with Sheila. I would like to see square foot cost based on total project cost as well when we are deliberating.
Okay. Yep, that's something that we can add to that new spreadsheet that we gave you as a total cost per unit, total project cost per unit, and then the hard cost per unit.
So before, well, maybe this is the answer. Before we make an amendment to change this, let's move down the document until we get to that maximum per unit cost. And then whatever you guys decide there will dictate what this definition needs to be.
That sounds fine.
Did someone make an amendment?
A motion.
Motion? I don't.
Sheila did, yeah.
Do you want to withdraw that, Sheila, until we have that further discussion?
Yes, the motion's withdrawn.
Okay, and then we move down to page 4 to forms. We've just added a definition of form. A form means the most current version of any form referenced in this QAP, which forms are available on the website. And that URL will be inserted in that spot.
We went past hard cost definition.
H is after F. G,
What was that?
F, G, H. He went down to the next highlight item.
Oh, okay.
Okay, here's the hard cost definition, which we just kind of talked about. It's changing it to all costs other than soft costs, land acquisition, costs and operating replacement reserves. And that they include any building. It includes any building acquisition costs.
Right, and then later on, we limit the hard cost to $175,000 per unit if this is adopted, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So today we have a situation where we actually don't take applications that are over the cost per unit that we've agreed on in the old QAP, right?
Correct.
My concern is that if it's only hard costs in that 175, the real costs could be way, way bigger than that. And I know the board will have that information. I just wonder if we need to give better direction to the applicants in terms of what their overall development costs might be. Because we don't, as a board, we don't want to be in a situation where, yeah, the hard costs were only 175, but the land doubled the cost.
Right. I understand that concern, and so maybe...
This is Pat. I see Sheila's point, and maybe we want to include both limitations.
That's what I was just going to suggest, Pat, that we leave both of them. Leave the 230 in there and then add the hard cost ones for the 175.
But we're not quite there yet, but we'll be there in a sec.
Right, right. I understand I'm kind of off the track here.
Oh, that's
Well,
fine.
no, these definitions are in alphabetic order. They don't necessarily follow where the rest of the QAP is going to be. So, okay, and then we're to page 6, which we're referring to the same stuff on the project square footage. So I think it's probably the same discussion. Oops, I'm sorry, I skipped land and property control on page 5, which is the definition we expanded. Legally binding documentation of title or right of possession and use of the property, or the right to acquire title or right to possession and use of the property for purposes of the property, including but not limited to documentation of fee ownership, lease, buy-sell, etc.
And I would add that I don't think this is a substantive change as much as just a clarification of the definition.
Okay, so back to property square footage is the same that we're talking about earlier. So we'll maybe want to go back to that in that same discussion. Qualified management company, we've had the definition out there for a while. We are adding management personnel that deal with files are required to meet the education requirements, and that hasn't been previously added to this definition. So we're just adding that they need to meet the education requirements in Section 12, which is the compliance area under the education requirements. And also that they have delinquent MBOH late fees. And then going to page 7, we're looking at small project definition, which means a project with 20 or fewer units, and the same thing into the small rural project. Soft to hard cost ratio, we're talking about the hard costs as defined, and land value added into those. And that land value as shown by the comparative market analysis required or the appraisal. And we got, we were asked to define substantial change, so we took the language from number 9, which is under the negative point area on the scoring criteria, and added a little bit of language stating that these are some of the examples of what could mean a substantial change.
Mary, can you tell us more about the delta between 24 units and 20 units for the small rural and small project? I'm just interested in the thinking behind it. I'm not opposed to it. A large majority of our projects that end up in the general pool are 25 to 40 units, sometimes less than that. And actually a small project, a small rural project, 95% of them are less than 20 units that have landed in that small rural project pool, except with rehab. And it doesn't, they can still take a project with more than 20 units and go down to that small number. It just wouldn't be inside that small rural project pool. So this change was suggested because it reflects the reality of the applications.
Of what, yeah, of what has been funded in that pool.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. On page 12 and 13, it actually has moved to page 13, highlighted area. If you remember on the last QAP, we added these late fees, and we want to make, we're addressing that if they have delinquent late fees due to the board, that they are not an eligible applicant, and that's from letter of intent all the way through award. And then under tax credit proceeds, we're adding a fee if they don't get those partnership agreements to us within that time period. We're having some trouble getting those documents. Okay, so now we're to the cost per unit. And this is the language that we proposed, that it would not exceed 175, and that it applies at application 10% and 8609, and that if they go over at the end of the day that they can receive negative points.
So the math on this is that $55,000 per unit, the delta between 175 and 235, potentially is land and other soft costs and reserves.
Correct. We looked at applications that were funded that were figure, actually some that weren't, and that's a little lower than some of them, but a lot higher than a lot of them.
So Mary, is it fair to say that the applications in just the most recent round, all of the projects that in there would have qualified under the 175 and the 230? Well, with the exception of Sweetgrass, and I realized that they...
Blackfeet 5 would have been a little bit higher than this.
Okay, so there have been...
But they were at 229, 499 or 999 or something like that.
Right, and then their hard costs were at what?
They would have been closer to 200.
Okay.
And we went on the lower end of this because we're pretty sure we're going to get some pushback, so it leaves us a little room to adjust if we need to.
And I'm pretty sure we'll get a lot of comments on this.
Yeah, I think we will.
Now, Sheila, what you had said and maybe what you and Pat had thought was maybe to actually, rather than take out the 230, maybe do both of them. And then correspondingly, we'd need to change the definition above, which we can just do before we release.
Well, we could do the 175 and then below they also may not exceed the 230, which includes land costs, total project costs. And total project cost is defined, I believe.
And I'm comfortable with staff kind of mushing this around and getting the language right, but you know where I'm headed with this one.
So to be clear, we would have two limits, a limit on cost per unit that's based on hard costs only, and a second limit that's based on total project costs.
And there is a definition of total project or total development costs in the definition section.
Yeah.
I think what we want to do is add a section here that's called total development cost per unit cannot exceed 230.
Right.
So perhaps I should make that as a motion.
So I wonder if your amendment could be something along the lines, Sheila, of, you move to amend the main motion to include in the cost per unit maximum to also not exceed 230 total project costs, and to adjust the corresponding definitions above.
It's exactly what I meant to say.
That's it.
With that, I'll second.
Greg, do we vote on each amendment to the original?
Yes, and I also, JP, think before each vote on each amendment, we'll need to allow for public comment also, reminding folks that they also have a chance to public comment, during the period.
Is there any comment, either from board members or from anyone else on the phone on the motion at hand? Hearing none. Bruce, do you want to do? Should we do a roll call for each of these, or just a voice vote? Okay.
Paula?
Doug?
Yes.
Jeanette?
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
Sheila?
Yes. Yes.
JP?
Yes.
5-0 yes.
Okay, then we're moving to page 15 on debt coverage ratio. We've clarified the language to that it's projected to trend upward through the first 15 years of normal operation. It should be between 1.15 and 150 in the first year of normal operation, which is the first year that shows on the spreadsheet on the UniApp. For projects who are going to, the DCR is going to trend downward the first 15 years of normal operation. The DCR should be between 110 and 150 during the entire 15-year period. Still beginning with year one. Okay, then we go to page 16 on replacement reserves. We've just raised it to 300 across the board. Those numbers haven't been adjusted for several years.
Can we spend a little time on replacement reserves? And I want to background this thing for folks. So we often are faced with renovation projects, which in part, at least in part, are caused by the fact that there's not enough replacement reserves, that the project over 15 or 20 years hasn't been properly reserved for. So I wonder if this is a time where the board can take a step forward on that and say that we don't see that there's a limit. I'm focusing now on the $1,000 per unit. The way I read this, you can reserve $300 a unit. After 4 years, you're at $1,000 and you don't have to continue those reserves. And I think we should be in the situation of saying, you got to put aside reserves every single year. I understand that changes your pro forma, raises the cost of the project, but we're never going to get out of this cycle of hearing that projects need to be preserved, so we can't create new units. And I think this reserve policy is very important in that regard.
So
Just strike that last one.
we can just strike that last one, that last sentence, until the replacement reserve equals.
Right, right. So it has to be
What you
annual. I would be happy to make that motion.
Jeanette, I'll second the motion.
Okay, is there any comments from anyone on the phone or from board members? Hearing none, what would you like to do a vote for us?
Doug?
Yes.
Jeanette?
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
Sheila?
Yes. Yes.
JP?
Yes.
5-0 yes.
Now, with the board's indulgence, I'd like to focus on whether or not $300 is the right number. So there's two other things that other states use. One is that they require some reserves to be capitalized at the very beginning of the project, which would be an option for us. So you say, okay, you have to capitalize 3 years reserve and you have to add 3 years every year, or $300 every year. I just think we really need to focus on this reserve number. I don't know what it is, but I'm not sure that 300 is high enough.
So we could visit with some of the syndicators. I believe, from what I have heard, that most of them are requiring a very large amount to be capitalized up front. We probably need to have a discussion about whether the thing that's happening on a lot of these properties, and this isn't necessarily a discussion in the middle of this, but the thing that happens with replacement reserves is they tend to end up being a savings account for the owner who's going to sell the project at the end of the day. And they don't like to use those reserves. They just let them build up. We see that on all kinds of properties. Some of them are real good about using the reserves, others are not.
Well, then at minimum, what I don't know if we can do this, but we ought to say that's not right. And that the tax credits have funded this, and you don't get a savings account. I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent now, but you don't get a savings account. Those reserves stay with the property because otherwise we have to continually use more tax credits for preservation when what we need is new units. I'm willing to let this one go for right now, but just to put everybody on notice, I think we ought to take a really hard look at this.
And maybe we'll have to visit with Greg, but maybe that's something that we can write into the restrictive covenants going forward. That's not going to do us any good in the past, but going forward that those reserves have to stay with the property. Don't know if we can legally do that, but we can take a shot at it.
That's a fine idea. Let's charge Greg with looking into that.
Okay.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Greg.
I've got it down, thanks.
This is Pat. I'm wondering about the next line after the highlighted information.
Oh, yep, that needs to come out too then, doesn't it?
I would
Thank you.
move elimination. Well, I think that was included in the original motion because otherwise it's nonsensical.
Right.
I agree.
Okay, and then on page 16, somehow this got missed. Oh, no, it didn't. It just... Okay, on page 16, we're putting in some underwriting assumptions. We've been running into a lot of challenges on the way an applicant is underwriting their application. There's some syndicators will look at them different. A lender is going to look at them different, and they're wanting to use those kinds of assumptions. And we have set forth assumptions that they need to use and that we will use when we're underwriting these projects. We have suggested 7% before. We have only suggested things before, and it hasn't given us a place to go back to so that we're all kind of on the same playing field here. So vacancy rates at 10% for small project, 7% otherwise, up to 50 units. The income trending is pretty much what we have done. We're just stating it there. Some of them have been expense trending up at 2.5 instead of 3. We have not set out anything before on operating expenses. And that was a suggestion of the syndicators that were at the discussion meeting, QAP discussion meeting.
I think this is another one we'll get some comments on through the comment period, and we're looking forward to that.
And then we're going to page 20. On the basis boost, the discretionary basis boost, the application narrative and supporting documentation must specify and explain in detail the applicable considerations supporting the need for the requested boost. And any of the items 1 through 5, for example, any of the items 1 through 5, and justify the need for the requested boost, which is just really kind of tightening up that language, but so page 21, the legislature changed information request policy, so we're suggesting that it's going to be handled subject to law, and that the information that we list will be on the website, not in the document. The same with the ex parte communication policy. And you'll see that Greg added a fair amount of language there to kind of explain it.
We're planning on moving that out of the allocation plan and into just more general board policy that would cover everything, right?
Right. But would also be available on the website.
Bruce, I think we did want to have some statement in the QAP, at least general, to call their attention to it, but
yeah,
more
so that they realize it's out there. Yeah.
Will be on the website, yes.
Which is kind of what we have in those 4 paragraphs there.
That's the idea, yes.
Yep. Okay, then page 24. This is where, you know, we talked about this a little bit in our strategic planning meeting about.
And we talked about it at the January workshop, and we got actually some very positive response.
There was a strategic planning meeting.
Or I mean with the developers and the...
Oh, yes, at the developers, I'm sorry, yes. The developers actually were really excited about this idea. So, if you remember at that strategic planning meeting with the board, we talked about maybe you have enough information with letter of intent to be able to choose projects to go forward. I sent you an email, and Bruce sent you an email with the information that we hope to provide at a minimum for you to make those decisions. So there's language, so it would change the schedule, but let's go to the board consideration and determination process. Sorry, I've got Greg running back and forth here.
Okay, got it.
Okay. So basically, at the meeting that at the month after the submission of the letters of intent, the board will provide an opportunity for applicants to make presentations to the board. Applicant presentations will, that's similar. And then the board, in determining which projects it will invite to submit applications going forward, we'll ask questions and stuff. So basically, we're proposing that the total amount of credits requested all the projects invited to submit applications will not exceed 150% of the state's available annual credit allocation, and no more than 10 projects will be selected. Each project selected will be deemed invited to submit an application, and an application may be submitted only for a project invited by the board to submit an application. And we sent you some information about the determination, some of the information you might be able to use. We talked about a I sent you a spreadsheet that would be like the blue spreadsheet before. Okay, Bruce is going to take over here for a minute. We've got the demographics, which were attached to the QAP and will now.
So this is just an example I put together of what you might see, and this is the Exhibit G, which will be basically a form now, but it will be updated with current information. So you'll have demographic and economic information to consider. You'll also get a schedule that shows in all of the communities that we've received letters of intent for, the projects over the last 10 years. So you'll be able to see that information and be able to compare that.
Actually, what we've done is give them all of the towns now, not just the ones where there's projects.
Okay, so all of the towns. Okay,
yeah.
Well, that's good information. Then, and of course, this will look. This is just an example. Like we've talked, we're going to put in total project cost by unit and hard cost by unit, and we'll probably refine this as we go forward. But it'll be a comparison sheet by project for several different attributes for each project. So I think you'll have a considerable amount of information there. Of course, at this point, we won't be able to provide the scoring because we're not proposing to do scoring. There's some other things out of the market study that we typically get that you wouldn't have at this point, but there would also be quite a bit of information. And then this is just an example of a letter of intent. I happened to pick the first one on the list, which this one was Big Sky Villas, but it just kind of gives you an example of all of the information that you're going to receive on each of the projects. So it gives you a pretty good outline of what this project's going to look like and the community that it's in. So I'm going to go back and give this to Greg.
So Bruce, the one thing that was on the first page of your analysis page was the demand for new units. And my thought is that usually comes from the marketing study. So we're not asking folks to do a marketing study.
And we're not going, we don't propose that at this point, but Mary, go ahead.
I chatted with Penny, and that is some of the information that is going to be in the white paper that will be available to us, and it will be updated annually.
So that's on a county basis, the demand, new unit demand. Okay.
Right, it would be, yeah.
And we'll have to make sure we note accordingly what that information is, because it won't be market study information, but it will be at least something.
Yes, yeah, and that's fine. And then I think you already said this, but the other piece of what I'd like to see in this is the history of where projects have been located. I always look for geographic distribution.
And that we've given you that spreadsheet, but that is also in that geographic statistical data on that colored spreadsheet.
Excellent, excellent, great. So I just want to talk about, so the process is that there's a letter of intent, there's a board meeting with 10-minute presentations, and at that board meeting, the board decides which 10 at the most go forward. Do I have that process right? Okay.
That's what we're proposing. And I realize that this is an idea that you kind of got about a week ago. So,
well, I think we talked about it before, and last month's board meeting with 19 projects, I think there was 11 developers that would have loved to get better information early so they don't have to do the entire application.
Yep, that is correct.
So I'm in favor of this process.
Let's move on.
This is Pat. I'm in favor of it too. I'd like to give it a try anyway, and I'd like to hear the feedback from the developers.
Are there some developers out there that want to chime in?
Well, hi everybody. This is Andrea Davis from Homeward. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Just because you asked directly, I'll go ahead and comment that I think it makes a lot of sense to try this out for efficiency's sake, not only for the Board of Housing staff and board's consideration, but then also the development community as well. There's a lot of time and energy that gets put into the applications, and I think it was hard for everybody to only be able, like as for the board, to only be able to select as many as you could with the limited resources we have. And I just think it makes sense to try this out and see if it works. So I'm supportive of it as well.
Can you guys hear?
But there's like a...
There was
Okay,
some
now we're
lovely
back.
music, sorry. Yes, this is Heather, also with Homeward. I hope you guys can hear me, and it's like the interlude music. I'm not sure where that came from, but I would support what Andrea said. We had a good discussion in the car about this. It saves time and money and energy to get clear direction from the board. And also, we had a pretty detailed discussion on how many you all should get to see so that you make sure that you have plenty of choices. So we'll just put some testimony in writing around some of those, minimum number of projects and 150% and read through what Mary and Kelly and Bruce put together and try to give you some detailed comments in writing after this point.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
So I'm going to move on unless somebody wants to discuss that further. So under applications, just to, kind of a clarification, application submission and method for 4% and 9% credits, that they're not to change or create folders, and if they want another folder in their electronic application, that they'll contact staff and staff will put another folder in there.
This is Greg. Another thing, we did a little organization kind of separating the provisions for 9% versus 4% projects. A lot of this language comes from other places where it was already located, but this highlighted yellow language is new language to further specify the 4% application requirements.
Yeah, and we're looking to limit how close to the board meeting they can submit a 4% application because it's an open cycle. So we want to see it at least 6 weeks before the scheduled board meeting at which it'll be considered. Okay, and then under section 5, we're raising the letter of intent fee to $1,500. Page 28. We've proposed some language that in a very special situation that the board would be able to, at any time outside of the competitive award credits, any time outside of the competitive cycle, for purposes of funding repair or replacement of a project building due to life safety emergency as determined by MBOH in its discretion. The applicant must submit a letter of intent, and the board must invite the applicant to submit an application before making an award. The application must meet all QAP requirements. So this would be actually a future allocation in very special circumstances, in case that situation would arise.
Yeah, I think But I think this is one that we're kind of putting out there for some discussion too, to the input we get back. But, you know, in the event a hurricane hits Montana, that we have the ability to, you know, help a project out that is having life safety issues.
This came on my radar a little bit when I was in Florida at a conference for developers. You remember the recent riots in Boston area, Baltimore, not Boston. A project was actually framed, the elevator shaft and everything were all in, and that building got torched during that riot and actually burned to the ground. It actually melted the elevator shaft, is how bad that fire was. So they had to start all over. So it just gives you a little, and it would be totally at board discretion whether that can happen or not.
So we'll look forward to comments on it.
Okay. So under the small rural projects on page 29, that's just referring to the 20 units or less again. On page 30, under application, it clarifies the language that you must submit a letter of intent and that meeting the requirements of QAP, and that the board has invited that application to go forward to be able to submit a full application.
I apologize for interrupting here. I'm going to have to leave for another meeting, but I wondered if there was any appetite on the part of the board to require a 4% analysis from preservation projects before they could apply for a 9%, or maybe simultaneously. So you guys know where I am on this preservation thing, but there are some state housing authorities that don't fund 9% for preservation. They only do 4s. I think in talking to staff, they've said, you know, the developers say they can't do that. The projects are too small, the rents are too low. I just wonder if we should require that analysis to be submitted with their application for the 9s.
This is Pat. I support what Sheila's saying. If nothing else, we'll start getting some information that we can analyze and try to overcome some of the obstacles to using 4% for rehab.
So would that be a part of the application process more than likely? And then if it was, then they would just have a separate kind of financial analysis to show why it wouldn't work, or why it would?
My question about that is, so are we going to require that at letter of intent?
That's what I just said. I was wondering if it was at application or letter of intent.
Well, it seems like they might be able to do it at letter of intent because they've already got their numbers for the 9% done. So, you know, if they could do an analysis with a one-page explanation of why 4% don't work or something, I'd be satisfied with that. I like the idea of Pat's point that it gives us a lot of good information to act on potentially in the future. Pat, I'm going to let you carry this one, and I apologize, board, but I'm going to sign off.
All right. With that in mind, I will make a move. I will move that we include such a requirement for rehab projects, acquisition and rehab.
So would that maybe be under the threshold?
Let him do a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we have a second? I'm not hearing one. So
Moving on.
maybe it's something that we need to discuss more thoroughly and plan for next year.
Yeah, I think it needs more discussion here. I'm trying to, you know, I'm trying to think through the ramifications of that. So that's why I'm not making it better.
You could, if you want to, include it in the proposal in order to get comment on it and make a final decision when you adopt the QAP as well. That would be just an option if you want.
Well, we certainly can, you know, work with the developers and try to kind of see how that might look and feel and work as we move forward. We know you guys are interested in it, so whether or not it's in the allocation plan or not, we can do some work on that, Pat.
Yeah, I'd be more comfortable doing it that way, kind of a sidebar discussion. Is this what, yeah, so I'd like that to be the process.
Okay.
Okay, so under threshold requirements, there's some clarification language in there. On number 13, we have changed the language that all applications must include a comparative market analysis or an appraisal done by an independent related party, because we're using the value of that land put forth by that CMA or appraisal in other calculations. Number 17 and 18 are just expanding on the language with a little bit of what is in the code and what's required. On 17, what's in the code. On 18, what's required in the Montana Code annotated for that tax exemption. Number 25, basically clarifying that the narrative must include the applicant's own proposed total score for each scoring item in the development evaluation criteria, and at the conclusion of the narrative, the application's own proposed total score.
So you're saying that they provide their own opinion on how well they're meeting all their criteria?
Correct. And most of them have been doing that. There's just a few that haven't, and then they've come back and wondered why they didn't get the score when they didn't actually let us know they were looking for it.
Have they been realistic in their own making their own judgments?
Sometimes. Not always.
Okay.
This round was pretty good on the ones that scored.
I mean, I'm just wondering about the true effectiveness of that. I mean, I'm not opposed to it, but I just am curious about how really effective is that. But somebody else can weigh in. I'm just uncertain.
Well, I think it gives staff an insight onto what they're expecting to, so, you know, we can educate and talk, and so there's no surprises.
Okay.
The narrative that they give us is supposed to address each item in the criteria so that we know what they're after without having to find bits and pieces in a 500 to 1,000 page application.
Okay. So this is of help to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, that's good enough.
Okay, page 36 under the development evaluation criteria and scoring. There's an update on the number of points that are available. We have proposed leaving the threshold where it was. And then on page 37, under lower income tenants, you'll remember that Tom Mantrek stood up and talked about his 40% units that he actually ended up with a lower score because he targeted more 40% units than he needed to.
Right.
So we're proposing that if they are targeting more than they need to on the 40s, that they can add those additional units into the number of 50s that they're targeting to push that score up to where it would be if they were 50s. Number 4, on community input, there was a lot of discussion about this at the QAP discussion meeting, and so we're proposing to change, instead of 40 points available, that 10 points will be awarded for each of 1 through 4. And that they need to address in that scoring item the relevant pages and paragraphs in the market study. That also follows under the appropriate development type. Under number 5, we're raising that to 50 points under the preservation or increase of housing stock. Under amenities, the developers asked that we do points per item rather than for each 3, so we changed it to 3 items, or 3 points per item rather than 10 points for every 3. And that amenities list will be in a form on the website. And under number 6, it's really clarification that one member of the management team has to meet the education requirements under Section 12, and that a member of the development team has to have been trained by a nationally recognized compliance training company. They do not have to be certified. Number 7, we've increased the points in the first paragraph. Up to 60 points may be awarded for the participation of 1 or more local entities. 10 points will be awarded for each of the local entity participation items 1 through 4 documented in the application as provided below. We've clarified that it has to be a binding written agreement that they're submitting with the application. Which is basically what all of that language says. And that they can't use that same points for this as they would have in, they can't be counted towards more than one item. Under 8, special tenant populations with special needs, we added veterans and victims of domestic violence. And you'll see that we've put in some maximum of 25% of the units in the project. The Olmstead Act, which talks about integrating special needs populations in with the general population, basically. There has been some move by advocates across the country going after states that have funded housing for special needs populations. so that they have a property that is specifically for developmentally disabled or physically disabled or any of the things that would fall under special housing needs. And states have been losing those lawsuits to the tune of several $1 million. So this is an attempt to keep us out of that situation.
Hey, Greg, the last line, units targeted to victims of domestic violence,
Yeah,
probably.
I have a note here on that. Okay, and number 9, we're adding target for the total project cost to be funded by housing credits. New construction at 75%. Rehabilitation at 70%, and combined new construction and rehab at 72.5%. So if they're equal to or above those numbers, they'll get negative 50 points. If they're below those targets, they'll get an additional 50 points.
So this is generally a way to encourage folks to try to use the least amount of credits that they need to make the project feasible. And so we can stretch our credits further.
And then on number 10, which is the developer knowledge and responsiveness, it's really basically some clarification language. The substantial change language is in the definitions now. And then there's a method added for assigning those points. And I don't know if you want me to go through those or if you just want to take a look at them. You can take a look at them as easily as I can read them to you. You want more time to look at those, or do you? Okay, page 49. We have extended the deadline for the 10% cost certifications to be the first anniversary date of the executed reservation agreement rather than the anniversary of the credit award. We had some discussion from developers on that. They had some issues meeting that the deadline we had there with working through some other programs. And we are still well within the code by giving them that additional time period. On page 50, on the 8609, the final allocation 8609s, we've added additional language that if the 8609s need to be reissued after completed by MBOH due to developer error, the MBOH underwriting fee must be paid again. Page 52, there's some clarification language, and then we've changed the time period, the 30 days before any proposed change, to at least 30 days before any proposed change. And then lower down there, MBOH staff will review requested substantial changes and may approve or deny approval of such changes, or may request board consideration and determination of the change request. If MBOH staff denies approval of any project change, the applicant may request board review and approval of change request. In additional language, the applicant must inform MBOH staff if the proposed change requires immediate and urgent review and approval. So this language is basically authorizing the staff to approve most changes unless the staff is uncomfortable with it, and then we'll take it to the board. Page 53, under compliance fees, we're stating that not only the owner's certification needs to be in, but the complete annual compliance package needs to be received on time, or the late fee would apply. And adding a fee if they aren't notifying us of owner management changes on page 54. Clarification language on page 55 about the qualified management company, which we put into the definition of the qualified management company. And then that we're deleting the exhibits out of the QAP, that they'll be changed to forms. They'll be referred to as the form name and be available on the website.
So I think with that, those are the substantial changes. Mr. Chairman?
Thanks. Thank you, Mary, for going through all that. Is there any comments or questions from board members?
This is Sheila. I just wanted to tell you I was back on the line.
Welcome back, Sheila.
Just JP, just one question, or not question, a comment, I think, and maybe to Greg. I think Sheila has a really good point about the reserves and not being utilized and them being stockpiled and those such things, which I agree that they should be using them. However, I'm wondering if the fact that it's kind of an independent business decision, I'm really not sure it's our purvey to tell them whether they can or can't. But if they don't, I don't want them coming back for tax credit. And thus, so I'm wondering, Greg, if there's a back way of looking at that legally, if the first of what Sheila had talked about proves to be an issue. If we know that they're stockpiling and have a large reserves and having done it, I don't want to see them. So that's just been a comment.
Okay, thank you. I'll consider that.
On that point, remember that a good share, not all, but a good share of the projects that we see that come in for rehab are owned by a different entity then owned them during that original period.
Yeah. We'll look at the issue though with Greg.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Is there any public comment on any of the sections of the QAP as proposed?
Yeah, this is Kevin Thane with the City of Bozeman Community Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, or my advisory board. And I wonder if we could stroll back and take a look at the green building and energy conservation standards. That was something at the workshop here in Bozeman we had considerable discussion about, and there were some changes submitted by what was essentially a subcommittee, and that was sort of glossed over here today, and I'd like to take a look at that and see what's being proposed.
Kevin?
Yes.
Kevin, just to clarify that I believe that subcommittee is still kind of working on that form, right?
No, we have the form, Kevin, but it's going to be a form that's attached.
So then originally, as was submitted for consideration at that work session, the whole green building section had been struck. I see that it's now returned, that you've just brought it back up. But, you know, how does the form then come to interface with the actual scoring? I don't, you know, not being able to see the form here that you're indicating. Is that form going to be where you could receive the 100 possible points that are listed? What's the direction?
Kevin, we got that form after everything was submitted for the board packet. So it has not been included at this point. Staff can still change the point language to match that, or make some adjustments to that form and and go with the points going forward.
And we'll distribute it so folks can see what it looks like.
Okay, so again, just kind of trying to understand here, is it the intent that the points that will be awarded as in the QAP will be based on the responses that you put on the form?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
This is Pat. This kind of raises a question that I have. The forms could make some dramatic changes that the board doesn't see. I think when the QAP comes back to us in March, while not included as exhibits, we should also be able to see the forms.
We'll do that.
We'll provide them.
Is there any additional comments on the proposed QAP for next year?
This is Heather with Homeward, and as we stated before, we'll follow up in writing starting tomorrow when it goes out for public comment. We'll give some feedback on some of the specifics around the DCR. Very good conversation about the reserves, cost per unit, total development cost, et cetera, in the second round. So we'll put that in writing, but I also wanted to thank the board or staff for the putting a clause in there for projects that run into life safety issues. That would have been a really helpful tool or option to consider with Southern Lights. But with that said, I did want to let the board know, and I know we've let staff know, and I can't see an agenda, this may come up later, just wanted to let you know that we did settle on Southern Lights, and it went well, and we're going to be able to move forward with the completion of the second building, and that's kind of the general nutshell of an update. But we finally got settlement last week, thanks to Andrea, Matt, and Chris, and a lot of their hard work. So I thought we should better let you guys know that.
Great news.
Yes, thank you, Heather. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any final comments before board members vote on?
Hi, JP, this is Andrea from Homeward. Can I comment quickly?
Yes, please.
I have no specific comments on anything, all the details. Like Heather mentioned, we're going to put our comments together in writing during the public comment period. But I just wanted to also thank the staff for all the hard work to get to this point, and the conversation that we had in Bozeman was really thorough, and it was a good one. And I like the direction it seems the board is taking on more policy level discussions around how to maximize the effective use of our limited tax credit pool. And I understand that you might make some changes that could be very different than the way we've seen rounds being allocated in the past. And I think as developers, we'll give comments around that. But in terms of the Board of Housing having the opportunity to help establish housing policy, really, in the state of Montana, you know, you're a unique entity in that way. And I guess my comment is really more related to encouraging you to be taking a look at how you can direct these resources so you can have very distinct impact in certain areas of housing need, whether that be preservation or new construction or what have you. But just utilizing the tax credit round as a way to be responsive to changing market needs, I think is a great opportunity. It seems like that's the direction the board is taking, and I just want to thank you for that. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other final comments? Okay, I think we have the QAP with, I believe, two amendments to it. Any comments from board members before?
Just comment is, are we just voting on the amendments, or are we voting on the whole thing with the amendments?
The motion is to approve the QAP as amended for purposes of sending out for comment.
Okay. Yes.
Jeanette,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Sheila,
Yes.
Keith,
Yes.
5-0 yes.
Okay, the QAP for 2017 will be released. Bruce, do you have a time frame on when that happens?
So we'll make the final edits with Greg here probably this afternoon, and I guess as it'll be posted out for public comment tomorrow. We'll have our public comment hearing on the 17th, and we'll post the exact time and information for that, so we'll handle that. And then we'll bring all the comments and the allocation back to you guys in March at our March 14th meeting in Butte. And you guys will be able to consider all those comments, make any changes you see appropriate, and then approve the plan for submittal to the governor.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Anything else before we adjourn?
Not from our side.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for participating this morning, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. See you in March.
Thank you.